Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais in Ontario, Canada, with episode number 7 of the Yakking podcast, where we talk about life, business, and more, and we bring you tips and ideas for a changing world. We don't have any guests today. It's just going to be Kathleen and myself, and Kathleen's going to ask me a few questions about my long and interesting life, much of it spent in a different part of the world. There's a few things there that will amuse you and some that might make you think. So, hi, Kathleen, over to you.
Hi, Peter. Welcome, everybody. It's good to be with everyone. And yes, we thought we would do this video podcast because Peter has had a very interesting life before his time here in Canada. And we thought it would be so interesting to kind of showcase some of the events that he experienced back when living in Zimbabwe. Some of them are humorous, some of them are downright traumatic, but the man has amazing resilience. And anyways, we wanted to just bring to you some of the life stories that he has, and he actually has a book. So he's a published author, and here's his book, 5 Steps to Thriving on Adversity. And at the end, we will tell you how you can get a copy of this book. But we also wanted to share with you some of the stories that are not in the book. And he's got so many of them. So Peter, tell us let's start. Let's just dive in and tell us some of the stories from when you lived in Zimbabwe.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thank you for that introduction. I think I need to start off when I was quite young, and I was really lucky to have parents who did not wrap me in cotton wool, quite the opposite, in fact. And they encouraged me and my brother to ask questions and to be curious. And really, that has benefited me my whole life. And some people say I'm awkward and a maverick because I just keep asking questions. So one of the early things my dad did, he started farming, and he had not been a farmer's son, so he started with not a lot of capital. So at the age of 10, I was milking cows before and after school, which is perhaps not strange for some Canadian boys, but in Africa that was not normally done. And then we had pigs, and I had to help him with the pigs. One day I remember in particular, Pig had a litter of piglets, and she was a big, huge, large white sow. And it was Sunday, so the workers had been given the day off, so my dad had me helping him feed them. And he said, go and give that pig, whatever her name was, this bucket of food. And I did. And I noticed a bit of wood had fallen off the thatch roof into her sty, and it had a nail in it. So I thought, oh dear, one of the piglets is going to get hurt. So without thinking, I jumped down into the sty, bent down to pick up the wood. And as I did that, I put my hand on her back. So she got a bit of a fright, thinking her piglets were threatened, swung her head around like that. And even the female pig sows have tusks about that long on them. And that caught me on the head. It missed my eye, luckily, and it gave me a fair cut. So I was complaining. I was only 10, so I sort of started whining a little bit, probably maybe crying. And I picked myself up off the floor, and I said to my dad, I think I've been hurt. And he didn't see the blood. And he said, well, if you can't help me, bugger off to your mother and get out of my way. So I went down to the house, and my mother said, oh, my goodness, what have you done? I said, the pig got me, and it was my fault. I frightened the pig. I don't think it's serious. And she said, what did your dad say? So without thinking, I said, he told me to bugger off to my mother. So you can imagine the reaction my poor father got when he came down for breakfast. But my mother's attitude was, well, it would probably be stitched, but it's Sunday. We don't really want to worry the doctor. Hospital's 20 miles away. I think we'll just put a few Band-Aids on it and see what it looks like tomorrow. And I never did get stitches in it, and it healed. It was a lovely talking point at school, and that was sort of an early lesson in not sniveling, being tough, and really that's the way we were brought up. So that's just a little story from my childhood.
That's a good one. I know you have so many when we chatted, and tell us about tell everybody about the airplane one, the airplane story. I know you have a couple of them, but there's one
I have a couple
recently, and why don't you recount that one?
I'll tell you about that one. So I was working for a big food company in South Africa, Durban, South Africa, and I was exporting stuff to several African countries and the Comores Islands. And one guy who was a sort of agent for us that I worked with for the Comores Islands said, I'm going there in my plane, flying my own plane. Why don't you come with me? So I said, yeah, I'd love to, you see. So he said to me, it's a small plane and it's a single engine. I don't have a life raft. We're flying over the Indian Ocean. Can you organize one of those inflatable life rafts? So I said, yeah. And I thought he was joking. So, of course, I did nothing about it, you see. So two things happened. The plane was called a Mooney, single engine, and the inside seated 4 people, as long as none of them were too big. It was, remember the old British car, the Mini? I guess the cockpit was about that size. Yeah, no bigger than a Mini. So he told me 2 things. He said, don't drink too much because we're going to be in the plane for 7 hours and there's no washroom. So that stuck in my mind. And the second thing he said was, did you bring, as we got in the plane, did you bring the life raft? I said, no. I thought you were joking. He said, no, I wasn't. He says, can you swim? I said, no, not very well. He said, well, nor can I, so we might have a problem. So anyway, we start flying over land, and we're flying over a country called Mozambique, which was newly independent after the coup after the coup in Portugal, and it was a real bad situation, civil war, and we had a telex saying that if we had to force land for emergency, we were allowed to land in Mozambique. But some colleagues of ours had done that about 2 weeks before, and they were still in jail in Mozambique, even though they had the text. So we didn't want to land in Mozambique. And while we're flying over Mozambique, suddenly he has it on autopilot. We're going along beautifully smoothly at 15,000 feet, and suddenly this plane starts falling out of the sky. I mean, like in a movie, like this.
Oh, dear.
And he says, oh, shit, we got a problem. And I knew that. And he played with a stick and he got it level. He said, oh, something's gone wrong with our autopilot, but everything else is working, so we'll just have to fly it manually. So we took turns. I mean, he let me fly it quite a lot. But we didn't go all the way to the Comores because of this problem. So we stopped in Blantyre in Malawi, and we stayed at a hotel, but the hotel's quite far from the airport. So we went out from the terminal building and we found a taxi. It was an old Peugeot. One back door didn't close. We had to hold on to it. The driver, typical of Africa, the driver said, I can take you to your hotel, but we have a problem. You know, that's the most common phrase in Africa. We said, what's the problem? I have no money and I have no petrol, gas. So can you pay me in advance for half the journey? So we said, yeah. So we gave him some money and off we go. And on the way to the hotel in Blantyre, suddenly he goes off the road down the shoulder and he's doing this with the steering wheel and something had broken in the steering. And we almost turned over. We stopped. He says, oh, I'm really sorry. So he leaps up onto the road and he flags down yet another private car, his friend, and he says, my friend will take you to the airport. He said, but we've paid you. No, well, I'll sort it out with him. You pay him the rest. And they had some arrangement. So we got to the hotel. So that was the second escapade or adventure in that escapade. And then next morning we went back uneventfully to the airport, took off. We're flying over the ocean. So the pilot says, about that life raft, I said, the one I didn't bring. He said, yeah. He said, well, that we're flying at 5,000 feet. It's about 3.5 hours flying time from the African coast to the Comores Islands. He said, at our loading that we have on the plane, we can glide for about an hour, I guess, from this altitude if the engine cuts out. He said, but we need to go 3.5 hours before we get to the island. So for 2.5 hours, we're going to be in no man's land over the ocean. If the engine stops, we're in the water. So it's a pity about that life raft. No life jackets, nothing. So we held our breath for those 2.5 hours, believe me. Anyway, we did get to the island and he said, hold on, this is a really difficult place to land because you fly straight into a big volcano with a landing strip. So you have one shot to put that plane down. And we did. So that was rather an exciting little journey that we had there, you know.
Oh my goodness. You know, when I think of you, Peter, I think of a cat with 9 lives, because honestly, some of the tales that you've recounted over the course of the years that I've known you, is like, how on earth did you survive that? Or how on earth did you overcome some of these events that have happened? So tell us something else about your life
Well, I'll give you another
sure.
quick airplane one while I think about it. So when I was we had a terrorist war, so all able-bodied men had to do national service. I did 9 months. Younger guys did a year after me, and then we spent a varying period of time in the army on call-up between doing our work. And towards the end of my period there, it was 6 weeks army, 4 weeks home. 6 weeks army, 4 weeks home. But on one of my tours of duty in the operational area, I was really lucky that the major, the company commander, was a good friend of mine and a business colleague. So he gave me a fairly cushy job as being the company clerk, which meant I sat around in shorts, sunbathing most of the time, and handed the mail out to the guys and did a bit of work on signals duty on the radio at night. Sometimes went as an armed escort on a truck, but it was a fairly comfortable 6 weeks. And it was also a bit boring. So we had a couple of helicopters stationed there and one fighter plane, two-seater propeller-driven fighter plane, which was called top cover. He would fly high above to guard the helicopters who were very vulnerable to ground fire. So the pilot had to take a technician or a second person with him in the plane, and his technician was thoroughly bored and would rather sit on the base drinking beer. So he spoke to all the NCOs, non-commissioned officers like myself, and said, "Would you like a ride?" And I said, I wouldn't mind. So he said, "Okay, we go out tomorrow." So he straps his parachute on me, and the parachute's like a cushion under you that you sit on. And I said, "How do I use this?" He said, I haven't got time to tell you, and you'll probably break your leg anyway, but if you have to use it, you've got a chance of surviving. But if you haven't got the parachute and something goes wrong, that's it." And I said, "Okay, thank you very much. What do I do?" He said, "I'll get rid of the canopy. You see that red patch on the wing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You jump onto that, but you won't hit it because by the time you get there, the plane's gone already." And I said, "And then?" He said, "Then you pull this handle." Thank you very much. This guy was a born comedian. So we're flying at about 8,000 feet above the ground. And suddenly the plane starts, "It's wrong." He says, "Would you like to fly it?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And I'd flown a small plane a couple of times in the past. So he said, "It's very sensitive. It's not like a helicopter. You've got to be really careful with the stick." Okay. So I'm flying, and we go into cloud, and he said, "When you go into cloud, watch your instruments and always trust your instruments." So I'm watching this artificial horizon thing, and suddenly the plane starts falling out the sky. This is like in my other story. It's going down like this, like a World War II Battle of Britain movie. And he says, "Well, correct it." So I'm trying to pull the stick because I know which way to pull it, and it won't move. And he says, "Don't overdo it because it's sensitive." And I'm trying, it won't move. It's a dual control plane, right? He's got a stick and I've got a stick. And this engine's really whining. This thing's screaming down. And I think, how far is the ground? And eventually I said, "Take over. There's something wrong here." So he gets his stick and he goes, huge maneuver. What the guy had done, he jammed his knee against the stick so I couldn't move mine just to get me worried, you see. So he corrects the plane and their heart sort of starts beating again. And then he wanted to test his gun on the way back. So he came in this huge dive down and he fired. He put 2 cannon shells through a 45-gallon oil drum sitting on the side of the runway. But it's such a steep dive. It's like a roller coaster at Funfair. So that was another very interesting little plane ride that I had.
I'm sure you didn't appreciate his antics.
But he did say to me, he said, "I got to congratulate you. The last guy did that too, vomited all over my cockpit." So he said, "You didn't do that." I said,
"Well, served him right."
Yeah, that's right. It's funny when people get bored in the bush, they get up to some funny tricks.
Oh my
Anyway,
goodness.
that's a couple of aeroplane stories.
Right. And I mean, you just, there's so many of them, Peter. So I know you had recounted one where you were, actually it's from the book, and I don't know if you want to go into that one, where you came face to face with this gigantic beast and you just were staring in this beast's eyes for, must have been an eternity, it seemed, but I'm sure it was just nothing but more than seconds. But I mean, this beast could have killed you in an instant. But anyways, maybe you just
that's
that story.
That's in, I think that's in the section of the book what I call about treasure your jewels, or treasure the diamonds. That's right. And the point I was trying to make is that when we look back on our lives, we all have little things that stand out. There were absolute gems when we think of them, and some of them are very simple. And that was one that I mentioned in the book because I was sitting in this really dry part of the country. It was over 40 degrees Celsius heat. and I was on guard next to a dry riverbed in a bush camp, and I heard this noise behind me. Turned my head, and there was this warthog, which is just like a wild pig, but quite big, with tusks 4 to 6 inches long coming out of its lips. And he was almost within touching distance because he hadn't recognized I was a human. I had camouflage uniform on. And I turned very slowly, and he was so close I could see all the beads of moisture on his snout and every hair on his face and his ears. And I just kept dead still. And I knew that he wasn't going to hurt me. And he knew that I wasn't going to hurt him. There was a real connection, that I haven't often had with animals. And it seemed like an eternity, but as you say, it wasn't that long. And then I got stiff, and I tried to move, and my gun hit a twig and made a noise, and he turned and shot off. But that was a real connection and an amazing experience, yeah. And one that people pay thousands of dollars for to go on safari and would never get anything like that. So I'm really grateful to have had those opportunities.
Right. And so out of curiosity, and I don't know if you want to share it with everybody, but what in that moment where you locked eyes with this amazing animal, what went through your mind? I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if you thought, is this animal going to kill me, or
no, not at all. Not at all.
You were so captivated by this beautiful creature that, what was it? It's almost like you were communicating.
Absolutely. That's what it felt like. It was, there was no fear whatsoever. There was no concern, no trepidation. There was peace and tranquility, and all I can say is connection with another one of God's creatures, and an ease of silent communication that is even very difficult to establish with people and with someone you love. It's hard to describe, but it was real high level, deep exchange of energy or something, but it was peaceful. It was really wonderful.
And a knowingness that neither one of you had any intent on hurting the other. And
absolutely. I think if I hadn't, I think if my gun hadn't hit that twig, he would have come another pace, and probably his nose would have touched my back. And because I was only turned a little bit, watching him out the side, I think he would have made physical contact, but again, without any intent of hurting me.
Right. Have you ever encountered anything else similar to that with any other animals? I mean, you lived in Africa, after all, where there's a lot of...
Sure. With my horses at times, I've had a lot of horses in my life, and at times there's been a definite connection with the horse. I remember, we have a little time, I was on a horse called Copper. I've had 3 coppers, in fact. I was on a horse called Copper, and we were herding cattle to get them into, it's called a dip. There's lots of ticks in Africa, so you put your cattle through a tank of insecticide to kill the ticks every week in summer. And I was going really fast, cantering, galloping after a stray steer, and there was a hole in the ground that I'd forgotten about. It was like a depression, and down he went, and it was on the side of a slope. And I was dazed, and I came to lying on my back, and out the corner of my eye, he was uphill on my left, on his back, with his legs like this. And I thought, the poor horse is dead. He's broken his neck. And then I looked at his eye, and he was watching me. Now, if he'd moved at all, he would have rolled down on top of me, and he was watching me. So I quickly got out the way, and he watched. He turned, his eye followed me till I got to his nose, and then he rolled down the hill and stood up. So he knew that he had to stay there until I moved out the way. So that, again, an incredible connection.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Goosebumps. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. How are we doing for time?
We are on nearly 19 minutes. So we're nearly there. So that's just a few stories. And I'll just sum it up by saying, one of my slogans is, for the benefit of our viewers and readers, it's not what happens to you in life, and a lot's happening right now that are causing great concern for people. Mm-hmm. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it that counts. And it sets the tone for the rest of your life. If you choose to be a victim, it's a problem. But if you choose to make the best of it, then you can. So
Peter,
that's my little piece.
Tell our viewers and our listeners about your book and how they can go about getting a copy. So once again, it's called 5 Steps to Thriving on Adversity by Peter Wright.
Sure. It's 5 lessons that I think are helpful to get through life, and each lesson supported by a few stories from my life, some of which I've mentioned here. If you want to get a copy of my book, it's not yet available as an ebook. It will be soon. But if you go to my blog, peterwrightsblog.com, and below me here, you'll see the link. There is an order form right on the front page, and it's 15 Canadian dollars, and I will send you a copy. Autographed too.
Great. Yes, I have.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Autographed a copy myself. So thank you for that.
You are welcome. So that's it.
And I'll just give you a little bit of an update in terms of what I do. I am owner of Carry Tech Solutions, and we are a company that is an outsourcing and IT outsourcing company. So we help companies here in Canada that require some sort of IT help, whether it's projects, software customization or development, or app development. That's what we do. That's what we help you with. And you can reach us at carrytechsolutions.com.
Thanks, Kathleen. And yes, in this funny time we're living in, Kathleen provides a really good service. So get hold of her. Her contact details are at the bottom of the screen as well. Thanks, Kathleen. And thanks to all our viewers and listeners. Until next time.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.